What's up, guys? This is our first live stream, so well, I say we, it's pretty much just me for this one, but we're working out the lighting and the audio and everything. So let me know in the chat if you can hear me. This is the illustrious HOKC studios located in Seguin, Texas. Beautiful Seguin, Texas. So tonight we're going to be able to kind of go over some stuff that we're not able to cover. Geez, I look like a Munsters character. All right, that'll work for right now. We'll work the rest of this out later. Okay, so tonight we're going to be able to kind of cover some gaps that we aren't able to do in episodes that may be a little too detailed, that maybe time wise it doesn't fit. Maybe maybe a little too uh, far afield for the episode, whatever the case may be. So tonight we are going to be able to cover the rise of the Comanche and kind of the details behind how they rose from if you've ever seen Dan Carlin's or heard Dan Carlin's um, what was his series on the Mongols? It was Rise of the Khans. He describes them. He describes the Mongols as a people that grew from just eating field mice and wearing the skins of rodents to one of the most powerful tribes in the world. So there's a real parallel between them and the Comanche. And we'll cover a little bit of that tonight. And I'm just going to wait for a minute or two, let everybody get in here. And this is our first time too, so we're just having a good time getting to hang out with you guys. Then we'll answer some questions at the end, and yeah, we'll just see where this takes us. Hey, Andrew, glad to have you here. So we'll give it another minute or two, and some topics I've got kind of lined out. We're gonna go over basically the who, what, when, where, why, right? Like, where did they come from? Who are the Comanche? What did they do? Why did they do it? And when did they do it? We'll be kind of delving into all those details. All right, cool. Good to see everybody. Everybody can hear me. Give me like a 1 in the chat if you can hear me. Everybody good? Audio and everything. I still want to talk for like 20 minutes and then nobody can hear me. Jack Shine, good to see you. Louisiana Gray, Daryl Durrell, Mouse Skin Pants. That's right. Good band name. All right, cool. So we'll just jump into it. And then if you get here late, you can just scoot back to the beginning. So the Comanche, they're a lot like it's a very common trait among Amerindian tribes to refer to yourself, your tribe, as the people. So they call themselves it's tough for me to say, the Nermono. All right, it means the people. It really means people. In fact, once we've got that down, let's delve into some of the sources I'm going to use tonight. I don't have. I listen to a lot of these books as audiobooks. I don't know if you can see that really well. This one is the one that I've been using most recently to really kind of dive deep for this live stream. It's called Comanches: The History of a People by T.R. Fehrenbach. That's a great one. There's also Empire of the Summer Moon by S.C. Gwynn. And if you can hear my dog scratching in the background, she's our mascot, so she's kind of a mandatory participant with this. And yeah, S.C. Gwynn by Empire of the Summer Moon by S.C. Gwynn. And then also there's another one called If the and I'll figure something out here by Pemmican. It is Comanche Nation, I believe. So those are three really good resources. You once you get done with those three sources, you probably won't want to go any further into detail on the Comanche. Those are super in depth and super entertaining. I've really liked all of them. But one common factor with the Comanche and why it's a bit of a slog to get through the first part of them is because the early Comanche lifestyle was so barren and so tough. Like the first 2 hours of the Comanches, the history of a people, have been a slog because it's just listening to constant tales of tribal warfare and people having to subsist on hey, no, stop, So she's a husky. She's a little vocal. Um, you would think being in the Northern Rockies that they would subsist on elk, moose, the big game, obviously bison in the northern plains. But the problem between what they had and what they were able to do was this gap in technology. So for centuries, they were a northern Shoshone offshoot. So that's kind of like northern Wyoming, really up in these the foothills of the Rockies, and they were just kind of the perpetual proverbial whipping boy for the entire territory, everyone around them. They were often thought that the Apache and Comanche tribes were related. So Daryl Durrell said that he often thought the Comanche and the Apache tribes were related. They are not known to be related, but the only um, people like a haplogroup that the Comanche do match with are the Aztecs. So there was some migration from the Northern Rockies into Mexico, possibly vice versa, where they went into Mexico and then some people regressed into the Northern Rockies for whatever reason. But that's the same, I believe, genetic haplogroup. So they're related to them, and then they became the Shoshone are as a kind of larger people related to the Aztecans. Then the Shoshone offshoot, the Comanche, really was existing at the bottom rung of even their own kind of tribe's social hierarchy. They were touch louder, be appreciated. Yeah, cool. See if I maybe I'm just a little too far from the mic. But so kind of the whole point here is that they really had absolutely nothing. They couldn't hunt any of the large animals because if you really break down the logistics of it, hunting an elk, bison, a bear, even a deer is very difficult and many times very dangerous. And with when you only have spears and bows and arrows, and you're foot bound, those are just hugely limiting factors. So for it looks like centuries is most ethnographers kind of estimation that they were relegated to basically these kind of barren foothills of the Northern Rockies, and they would catch wolverines and badgers and mice, rabbits, squirrels, and cook them whole on a fire. Throw the whole thing on a fire, pick through that, entrails and all. Nothing went to waste, but they really uh, had nothing, and the whole gap was filled with the introduction of the horse. Tool. Hello from Arizona. Good to see you, Donald. So the Comanche are a real kind of study to me. I think that the analogy between the Mongols and the Comanche is pretty apt, but the more I learn, it seems to maybe even more apropos to compare it to our society with maybe the advent of the internet. Like it's something that took them from the proverbial 0 to 60. They just had such an explosion because of both their geographic location and this kind of innate propensity to connect with the horse, which sounds all kind of um, you know esoteric, right? But it's in many accounts that the Comanche they took to the horse faster. They adapted the horse into their culture faster. They were the only tribe to really successfully breed them, and they integrated them into not only their day-to-day life, not only their hunting, but their warfare and also like their economic pursuits, expanding their trade routes and their trade range faster and with greater propensity and intensity than really any tribe. And that came, like I said, from really the primary factor was their geographic location. So when they started to migrate south, they had been pushed out of that territory by other tribes that were everyone is still footbound at this time, right? So other tribes like the Blackfoot, the Cheyenne, who else am I forgetting? The Arapaho, that several others were kind of perpetually raiding them, and especially pre-contact Northern America, raiding was kind of a driving factor. Raiding for slaves was a driving economic and social political factor, because it was the only way that in a cashless, currencyless society, that men could really further themselves in that society and build their wealth. And this is especially before horses. Horses really would really um, replace a lot of that with as a show of wealth later on. But in pre-contact America, this way of life, I think, is incomprehensible to most people, especially now. We have a paradigm of a continent, or really two continents worth of people in I think the popular imagination, that were perpetually getting along with each other, whose warfare was at best or at worst, I should say, a kind of rough sport, and who were pretty much entirely unfamiliar with our notions of slavery, our notions of warfare, violence, in patriarchal lineage, etc. And this is just a a complete I'm trying to find a polite term for it, but it is wildly misguided and misinformed. Really, what you had was two continents worth of people, but we'll focus specifically on the one in the North America, a continent full of people who had, for centuries, existed by kind of most, especially on the Great Plains, migrating from territory to territory along with their seasonal hunting patterns. That drove everything, and that what drove that was manpower, was human power. The more humans you had, the more work that you could do, and the more work that you could get done for free to free yourself up to go hunt, the greater, more wealth you could build, the more sustainability you could build ashore for your family. And it became, or I mean, it was in fact a very violent, um, uh, I would dangerous place to exist. Really, coastline to coastline. In in Central America, they had there was the Aztecs, who was also an extremely violent society driven on slavery and sacrifice, but they were highly organized. And in the Northeast, we had the Iroquois Confederacy, who in fact was matriarchal, but also highly organized. And then that was more or less kind of it for you know structured, stratified, and influential, and large enough to be dangerous um, social entities and tribes throughout the entirety of the continent. The rest of it was tribes of, I mean, it could be dozens or it could be hundreds. At the very most estimates put it at, pre-contact, maybe 100 to 250,000 um, people in the North American continent. And I believe it would be a couple thousand uh, in total. When you think of the great warriors of the plains like the Comanche, you're really thinking, even at their height, of a couple thousand people. So it's very small numbers, very small bands, and it relied on tribal loyalty, and it was a form of turf warfare that was continent wide, and it was a battle for resources and a battle to assure the survival of your clan. And it's really not dissimilar to anywhere else in world history. It's just something that we kind of fundamentally romanticize and misunderstand in our common imagination today. But the Comanche in particular, I think, are overlooked because of their really kind of they shock people, I think, and I think in a way that even their contemporary observers weren't really ready for. Like, they were kind of a shadow once they started this rise and they started going south, and they made contact with the horse sometime in the 16th century. We don't, or the 1600s. We don't fully know where. Obviously, it's not recorded exactly what happened, but after the Pueblo Revolt, the vast amounts of horses escaped, and that was a from Pueblo, New Mexico, and that was a huge event that was kind of a terminal event in the history of the American West, because that just unleashed. It would be like giving away, you know, thousands of free iPhones today. Like it unleashed a technology, and having them all, prepaid and everything. So it's like a technology for free that fundamentally changes the way of life for virtually everyone in that society. So when the Comanche got a hold of the horse was kind of going north, the Comanche were coming south. The Apache really got a hold of the horse first, but they viewed it more as kind of a pragmatic measure. It just depended on the tribe. A lot of tribes viewed the horse as this great windfall of potential to raid and hunt, and some tribes thought it was just good for transportation, and some tribes thought it was just good for eating. So it just kind of depended on the predispositions and the presuppositions of the culture that it arrived to. But when the Comanche got a hold of the horse just after the Apache, they rose in such a rapid succession that it's not fully unprecedented in human history, but certainly with very little precedent. And I think the rapidity of it, just in a few centuries, is, I don't know, you can count on one hand how many times that's happened in world history. And it is certainly an admirable, but it's a tough thing to talk about because it's such an admirable endeavor on their part. It's something that um, everyone, I think, admires a rise to prominence, right? But it's also a very brutal world, and the rise to prominence came at a great cost, not only to the enemies of the people of the Comanche, but to the Comanche themselves in many ways. Um, and in fact, a lot of ethnographers, a lot of historians will make an interesting. I don't know that I do see the point. That an argument that the horse was in fact kind of a net negative for the Comanche and many northern plains tribes, because it discouraged their cultural kind of transition to agriculture, where they were going to. A lot of tribes had already been forced into that by not having horses, and thus they, would have to. How many people got in here? 81 people. Good to see everybody. Um, yeah, a lot of people would. So I kind of lost track of my thought there. Uh, yes, the Comanche were kind of stalled out culturally, because once they got it, but people would say the same thing about the iPhone today. They'd say like, "Oh, people were actually much more socially adept, and people will even say intelligent, 100 years ago than they are today." And kind of the implication there is that this device has kind of stagnated our culture by making it unable to advance, and unable to find other ways to adapt. And that's kind of what they're saying with the horse, and there's not a bad point there. But it's maybe tough for me to acquiesce to, because the Comanche were, however brutal they were, I think, the best at what they did. And they're, to me, so interesting because they are such an unintentionally Spartan-esque culture. A lot of the other tribes, their northerly neighbors, the Cheyenne, the Blackfoot, the Lakota, the Cree, et al., had far more advanced creation, or let's say in-depth creation stories, cultural histories, which were usually passed down in the Amerindian vernacular, in the Amerindian experience, through songs, poems, stuff like that, even artwork. And the Comanche um, were virtually devoid of that before coming down, really before being well into the 19th century. Like, before that, they are, in my mind, and I think it's an apt metaphor, they were the equivalent of, if you're a boxing fan, and I wasn't alive at the time, but if you were, you remember when Mike Tyson came on the scene as the heavyweight champion, or really before then, and then nobody knew what to do with this guy because he didn't have a robe on. He just wore black. He was, extremely technical, but also violent in a way that most, mainstream sports fans didn't know how to deal with. And I think there's a lot of parallels between that and the rise of the Comanche because um, they had, no war paint. Like, so when you would see a Comanche raid as opposed to what, most popular movies would show, what you might be seeing there is either Northern Plains tribes or a very late kind of iteration of a Comanche warrior. But for the first couple centuries of the Comanches' horsebound existence as proper horse warriors, after acquiring the horse in the 17th century, they had virtually no other interests other than hunting and waging war. They had no real chief system. You just kind of, it was like experienced warriors just got dudes fired up and they'd say like, we should go do this tribe or whatever, this tribe, this people, let's just go get them. And I had a dream about an eagle and then I saw an eagle today. And this is really like how it worked. They'd say, I had a dream about an eagle. I saw an eagle. That means that we should go attack the neighboring village or whatever. And that you had to convince people. There was no like formal position of leadership. Um, I mean, women had virtually no rights other than maybe like the first wife of a chief. Like polygamy was widely practiced. Wife sharing among brothers was not only a common practice, but seen as kind of like a net positive, as a kind of a polite thing to do. So it's just in terms of kind of, I guess you'd be like cultural anthropology. They began as a very rudimentary, or in the technical sense, stripped down culture with no religion to speak of, no social stratification to speak of, and really, just checking out the live chat real quick. Really, no um, overarching cultural goal or direction other than, in some senses, revenge. Like certainly exacting kind of their pound of flesh against the people who had transgressed against them for so long, and in the Cheyenne and in the Apache. Well, not so much the Apache; they would kind of run them out of Texas later, but several of their northern neighbors, there was a fair amount of retribution, but a lot of it was just uh, unfettered, unabashed ambition as well, because it's people that are trying to survive, and B, very very low in population, and C, it's a male driven society where the men have no other way to advance than to either demonstrate acts of heroism in warfare or in hunting. And really, it was kind of a tiered system. Even that was really kind of one of the few systems they had, was to say a young man had to go hunting, and then he could progress to being a warrior, and then you're just as qualified in most respects to at least attempt to gather a war party. So you didn't have to be this like mighty chief who um, said, "Okay, everyone, get in line and follow me." You just kind of convinced your dudes that you're going to go do this, and if you were the leader, you had kind of ultimate say over the direction of the party, but no real tactical say during the battle. It was kind of just like a lot of Comanche culture, a lot of Comanche tactics have this air of kind of implication to them. Like they are, it's not in a literal sense that they were born knowing this, but there's this sense that like it didn't take long for the Comanches to learn, and they didn't do a lot of formal instruction. It was like you observed, you became a warrior or a wife by observing what, the older people did. And even in that case, they had a very loose familial structure where it was the father really was kind of more of a friend, and discipline was enforced by the uncles. And it really, the female children were certainly doted on. Children in general were unusually doted upon for being such a, in most other aspects, kind of uh, Spartan-esque, I think is an apt description, or really pretty rough culture. They were very, very tender with their kids, really like to, build them toys and play with them and sing them, their kind of versions, their iterations of lullabies and stuff like that. But male children were far preferred, treated far better, um, and their kind of societal focus was on building them into a warrior. And then the only advancement from there was showing your prowess as a warrior. And really, where the Comanche came into in such prominence is by moving south, and that kind of came. I think it's misunderstood by some people as fleeing from the northern plains, and that's not to say that there wasn't um, maybe former uh, iterations of fleeing from northern tribes like the Sioux, Cheyenne, Arapaho. But after the Comanche had left the Rockies and gotten the horse, there's really no record of them fleeing southward. It's more of a very deliberate territorial press to capture what were the hotspot, or what was the hotspot of the continent for the bison herds, which is once the transition was made to the horse and the Comanche diet switched from largely rodents and roots and tubers and nuts to almost exclusively um, bison, and that's bison in all forms. That's um, you know meat, organs, bones, marrow, everything. Uh, there was just a massive decades, maybe century long press southward into the most valuable lands of the buffalo. And that also coincided with the horse diaspora coming north. And that meant the Comanche were just in a perfect spot to have the best access to the horses, to have the best access to uh, the buffalo herds, and also be able to just push now have a new technology and a new way of waging warfare, that would allow them to go on the offensive and take any territory that they found desirable. And that is such a stark contrast from pre-contact intertribal warfare that I think most people really have a hard time even kind of conjuring up a mental image of what that would look like. And really, it foot-bound intertribal warfare before the advent of the introduction of the horse was a it's certainly unglamorous, uh, you know, relatively unorganized, and very unfamiliar to especially the kind of European way of waging war. It was, like I said, primarily based on raiding for slaves and defending territory, but it would be there was no real concept in the native mind of really virtually any tribe of holding territory and incurring losses for the sake of holding that territory. There was no, unless it was just absolutely necessary to defend, family. There was no kind of cultural impetus for last stands. It was always seen like discretion was always seen as the better part of valor, more or less. And so it could be a kind of running knife fight, basically, over, could be miles of territory, could be over days. And it, the war trail would be littered with kind of the bodies of the slain, who almost a universal practice would be mutilated, whether it be the Comanche, the Lakota. I mean, almost any Northern American Amerindian tribe would practice some sort of postmortem mutilation because they viewed it as a uh, an infringement in the afterlife. So anything that they did to you, what be it cut out your eyes, you would not be able to see in the afterlife. They cut off your ears, you couldn't hear. They cut off other parts, you wouldn't be able to do other things. You cut off your feet, cut out your whatever. It was all brutal. It was all certainly to elicit a sense of a visceral kind of terror from their enemies, but it was also in their minds like a spiritually practical and pretty vindictive thing to do. But it was seen as it was seen as necessary, and I think in most terms justified because you're looking at in many terms, many instances, generations long feuds between tribes. And so these blood feuds where someone's grandmother had been taken in a slave raid 30 years ago, and now this band finally has a chance to get revenge on this band. There's a lot of vitriol and animus behind that, and it certainly only intensified in both scope and intensity as with the advent of the horse, because then it basically became a have and have not situation where those who were able to adapt the horse were able to into their way of life, in particular into warfare and hunting, were able to just make a rapid ascension in terms of their kind of practical abilities, like their where you were limited to rating as far as you were able to walk and traveling as fast as you were able to run. Now you were able to, ride one animal certainly, but in most instances, Comanche warriors would have several horses that they would rotate between, just on the trail, which is in and of itself a level of wealth that few other tribes were able to ascertain in terms of horse flesh. But they were able to expand their range and and kind of take over tribes who were more or less kind of bound by agriculture. If the tribe's way of life depended on staying in one place and culturally or seasonally raising crops, that had been in most cases wildly advantageous for both the advancement of that society and for the health of their people, because it provided a sustainable source of sustenance. With the advent of the horse, though, especially on the plains, that became uh, almost a I don't want to say a terminal sentence, right? But it became a huge liability, and tribes like the Mandan, the several I'm trying to think, the Pueblo, several tribes who had been wildly successful agriculturalists prior to the advent of horsebound warfare had just took wild losses on top through intertribal warfare once the horse tribes came to prominence. And I think a lot of people have a common notion of what a plains warrior horse a plains tribe horse warrior would look like. In the Comanche sense, it is not only, like I said, greater in intensity, like they had no war paint, they had no colorful war paint at this time. They would just smear themselves with black, the color of death, and their headdress was there were no real feathers at this time, like the northern system of the Cheyenne and Lakota Blackfoot of counting coup and accumulating feathers for great deeds done on the hunter and warfare was just something either the Comanche weren't interested in or just never adopted into their culture. But it was of virtually no interest to, especially the early Comanche. They were I think of it as just a stripped down war machine. Like they would travel with several horses, rotate between them, clad themselves in black war paint, black shields, buffalo horned headdresses. So no like war bonnets, just like a black headdress with two big. If you've ever seen a buffalo up close, those horns are huge, and it's like a wild thing to put on as a hat. So it would be crazy to walk out in the morning. Let's say you walk out of your lodge or several times. Like we did an episode on the massacre at San Saba in San Saba, Texas. It's just outside of Menard, and went there. It was visited. It was great. But those guys would have walked out, right? If you're a Spanish friar or an enemy tribesman, you'd walk out in the morning and just see dozens, maybe hundreds of dudes just painted black, their horses painted black with like buffalo horned headdresses. And the rules of warfare at that time were basically, we got to be careful with terms of service are so bad, right? When the Comanches showed up, it meant that male captives, if the worst thing that could happen was being a male captive by most estimations, because you would be tortured till termination, right? And a lot of it was viewed as kind of this final test that they were putting the warrior through. So very gruesome things from partial immolation to evisceration to staking people out on the plains to uh, amputations, assaults of all kinds, right? Were carried out. And the more stoically a man suffered it, it was kind of like this final competition between him and his torturers, where they were attempting to exude their magic over him and kind of uh, spiritually dominate him as well. And if he never flinched and didn't and remained stoic until he passed away, it was almost seen as like a regrettable loss on the Comanches' part. And they would also kind of they don't really describe how, but they would at least kind of in word of mouth venerate the guy and say like, oh, like I don't like the guy, not we're not cool, but you got to respect how he just hung in there to the end, and it's like that was a norm for warfare on the plains, and really a norm for warfare in North America. But the Comanche way of doing it was just at such a really the word that comes to mind is intensity, because it was just at such a rapid clip to go from hunter gatherers to this light cavalry that virtually no one in the world could match in, I don't know, like a century or two, like if that, and then to take over virtually Kansas, Colorado, Oklahoma, Texas, a lot of northern New Mexico, and a lot of New Mexico, and a lot of northern Mexico. I mean, they raided all the way south. In by some accounts, I've read south into the Yucatan Peninsula. So that's like into the Central American jungles. Their range was tremendously large after acquiring the horse. So that went from being able to, if you're able to raid as far as you can cover on foot, how far can you go in a day? Let's say you could run a marathon a day, so and then fight a battle. Maybe you could cover 26 miles a day, and that'd be like crazy, right? That's like a feat of endurance. With a horse, so I think it's described in Empire of the Summer Moon. S.C. Gwynn does a great job of it, because he says people at a campfire people at a dinner in Mexico City, I'm paraphrasing here, right? But people at a dinner in Mexico City were virtually in terminal danger of a Comanche raiding party sitting around a campfire where, current day Tulsa, Oklahoma would be. Like their range was massive. They were able to not only carry out raiding, but hunting and also trading at a rate that virtually no other tribe did. And it certainly throughout a scope of territory that no other tribe was able to accomplish. And all while really being kind of ad hoc in like a lot of ways. Like they didn't like I said, have a social organization, no head chief, which became a real problem in dealing with them because one chief's agreement would not, necessarily be the next chief's agreement. Um, Very little in the way of creation stories, and very little in the way of really recognized traditions. A lot of it was just like, uh, this guy liked to sing a song about this tree, so he sang a song about this tree. Maybe his son would sing the same song, but there wasn't any like uh, greater cultural connection to it. It was all kind of very loose and ad hoc, and I mean, by today's standards, wildly disorganized. And they managed to take over virtually the whole of the southern plains, which is just encompasses many thousands of square miles in, relatively speaking, the blink of an eye. And the only way that you do that, much like a Mike Tyson fight, the way that you become famous for your knockouts is to end your fights fast and end them violently. And these raids, especially among the Comanche, and it's not to play down the raids of other tribes, right? They were incredibly violent, but the kind of just directionlessness of the Comanche intent, like they were really not interested in any kind of, especially early on, they weren't interested in any kind of negotiations. They weren't interested in any kind of performative warfare, right? Uh, Wage any kind of, or they weren't interested in siege warfare. They weren't interested in really much of anything other than taking the territory and the resources that were going to be the most advantageous for them. And then they would kind of build that into a trade empire where they were not only they not only ascended kind of in warfare and in hunting technology. So I guess in that today's terms, that would be like food distribution technology, right? Like they were able to feed many more people, much more in a much more nutrient dense and reliable fashion than they ever had before. So that kind of created a, the cultural conditions to build this trade empire on top of their really kind of military expansion southward. So as they expanded southward, they became involved with the Comanchero traders in New Mexico. Sorry, watching the dog. Built long-lasting relationships, though tenuous, but long-lasting relationships with them, trading in. They would trade buffalo hides, um, oftentimes, sometimes slaves, captives, really more than we would understand chattel slavery, like captives that had been taken from homesteads could be bartered for. That was a long-standing kind of economic, uh, let's say, revenue stream for the Comanche. So it's just a very brutal world, but not one necessarily built out of love of brutality. It's just sheer pragmatism. So the Comanche expanded south, and they rose up through just incessant, largely kind of ad hoc and like I said, I wish I had a more flattering description than disorganized. Anybody in the chat like want to play like live thesaurus here? Give me like a better and more kind of flattering description of that. But yeah, it was just kind of comparatively, if you compared the Comanche expansion to the expansion of the Roman Empire or even the Mongols, those armies were armies in this kind of collective sense. And as far as they all served a large um, collective coalition, the Comanche really viewed themselves as like bands that got along. They were a people. They were the people. They all viewed themselves in this kind of. They would call themselves the people because they believed they were the superior version of a human. So that set them apart. Be that from other tribes, from Europeans, from whoever, right? Like that was, they viewed themselves as culturally, ethnically superior. Just out of, it's just, that's kind of that's a super common trait and rationale behind that trait, is a tribe calling themselves a people. But they were able to do so. They were able to expand with just these kind of loose agreements between each other, that expanding would be a cool thing to do, and that like having a bigger range, a bigger hunting range would be fun, or be a good thing, and that they should go get more captives because that would uh, be advantageous for XYZ reason. Uh, there was no kind of organized directive behind building an empire. It kind of just appeared. And the fact that it appeared from these people who, you know, maybe 2 centuries before, were having to throw whole, dead squirrels on the fire so that they had something to cook for dinner, is a cultural leap that, like I said, I think you can count on one hand how many times that's happened in world history. Now, there became kind of a double-edged sword, um, with this expansion, right? The expansion requires more resources, and it requires more people to ascertain and maintain those resources. So raiding for people became, in the Comanche sense, a crucial component to their not only economic but their kind of racial survival. The Comanche are known as, are reputed to be, among kind of the most diversified bloodlines in the Amerindian kind of pantheon, because they were very, very willing, out of, sheer necessity, to adopt, either orphaned children or captive children, to intermarry, to, they just weren't. Hold on, sorry. Dog chewing on something. Critical component to the show, the history buff. I can't really like get my camera down there to show you guys, but I'll introduce you guys to my dog here at some point. Anyways, the Comanche were, really became reliant on supplementing their population, because they not only lost a lot more warriors with such, um, high combat rates, or frequent combat rates. They obviously lose more warriors because they were having more battles. They would lose more men in hunting because they were hunting more and hunting in a more dangerous and dynamic fashion. That and then they would also, after especially the advent of the horse, have lose far more uh, pregnancies to miscarriages, because of the horse riding being particularly, detrimental in that sense. So that became, with the losses from violence and the low birth rates because of their lifestyle, there became a real need to supplement. And so you'll see, hey Caitlin, you'll see, that's my sister in there. You'll see a diversity and a kind of uh, uh, yeah, it's been referred to in other sources as an impurity. I'm not calling it that, right? But in the Comanche bloodline, that you don't see in tribes, oftentimes, like Cheyenne, Arapaho, Lakota, and in that becomes kind of a tough thing for people to nail down the Comanche on, um, exactly like what what a Comanche from the um, the foothills of the Rockies would have looked like. But I think that too was shockingly different to a lot of, um, people, a lot of tribes in the South who were used to dealing with tribes from the North, and to Europeans who, be they the Spanish, the French, the Americans, the Texans, who were two different things, at that time. But they they would oops, sorry, they were described many times as just markedly physically different from their counterparts, and there is in S. Seguin's Empire of the Summer Moon, he does. It's like, yeah, there is like an amount of kind of implicit, tacit kind of uh, racism in there in many just contemporary descriptions of the Comanche in the 19th and 18th century. But it doesn't mean that they're just like wholly inaccurate, because what shocked people about the Comanche, as well as their kind of uh, like I hate to keep saying Spartan-esque, but it's like it's the most apt thing I could think of at the moment. Their way of dress and kind of minimalist culture. They also were physically different in that they were from the mountain. They were from the mountains, and thus like much shorter on average. I think the average Comanche warrior, the average man was roughly 5'6", and the average Comanche woman be maybe 5 foot. So much shorter, squatter. I mean that in the most flattering sense possible. Heavily muscled, but the kind of antithesis in many ways, or certainly not what contemporary observers expected to see, having dealt with other tribes first, like the Blackfoot, the Cheyenne. Those were the first tribes that Europeans had contacted on the northern front. Like Lewis and Clark had only heard in passing of the Comanche. They were referred to by other tribes as the Paducah. And so and even then they don't really know they were talking about the Comanche, but the kind of common consensus that they were referring to the Comanche, from this kind of, they just had only heard about them, but no one had seen them, right, until really they arrived at the doorstep of the Spanish, and then accounts started flooding in from San Saba Mission, and a lot of missionary accounts. They're shocked by what the reputation of these people are, because they expect them to be kind of this James Fenimore Cooper stereotype of a very tall, lean, um, almost kind of with Romanesque maybe features, which is not uncommon in other northern tribes. But the Comanche they would describe them as, short and broad foreheads and heavily muscled. And they were a shocking kind of juxtaposition for people in many ways, that they were these guys who were unorganized, and their ponies in many cases were not what Europeans or Spanish would consider ideal mounts, but they were able to uh, carry out horsemanship that would be something that you would only see in, like, maybe if you've ever seen a trick rider at a rodeo, um, something like that, like someone who could do that and also shoot arrows at you, and then like let's say 200 of them all painted black with like buffalo horns on them and shooting at you. Imagine that. And they would attack in a cyclone, kind of a whirling formation. We've talked about this in these episodes, but the warriors nearest to the target would slide underneath the neck of their horse, loose their arrows, so their horse becomes kind of this blocking mechanism. Sorry for the light in the background there, but so it blocks the warrior shooting. And then also the kind of centrifugal force of this cyclone carries the warrior to the back, and the next warrior in line looses his arrow. So you kind of have this human Gatling gun that incrementally it's not a straight charge at you. It kind of, oh, sorry, that's the dog. Thought there was a fuzz. No, I'm just kidding. So you'd see this like cyclone coming at you, not in like a linear attack, but in a just this whirling dervish of violence, right, or whatever. That was almost, it was like trying to defend against a swarm of bees or something. Cannons didn't work against it. Really unified directed musket fire was tough, because even their shields, if they angled it correctly, could stop a musket ball outside 50 yards or so. And then they're able to unleash a far greater rate of fire than virtually any European power on the continent at the time, and much more efficaciously. So what you had was, much like Tyson again, during this period of years, right? And the Comanches terms, period of centuries, you're not literally untouchable, but there was very little that could be done. And if you look at it, it's another, I've read Empire of the Summer Moon probably the most times out of these three books. So I kind of keep referring back to paraphrasing that. But S.C. Gwynn does point out that you can make a line from basically like the Great Lakes down through or somewhere around there to Dallas and then San Antonio. And that's kind of as far as civilization or American expansion or any imperial expansion got for roughly 3 centuries. So these people who had just acquired this new technology in the form of the horse had also invented a new way of fighting. They had learned most of their horse tactics and horsemanship from the Spanish. They actually got on their horses from the right hand side, which is if you're an American in the American European sense. I don't know about European horsemanship, but in American horsemanship, you get on the left side. You get on the left hand side, so it's a very distinctive trait, right? That they carried on from the Spanish, and also they would carry long 14-foot lances, which I always thought until honestly not that long ago were something that they had carried down from the foothills, but they in fact had adopted them from the ciboleros. I'm not a linguist, right? But the buffalo hunters of the Spanish in New Mexico who had 14-foot lances. So that, coupled with this whirling cyclone of arrows coming at you was just kind of this force that people didn't really know what to do with. So they expanded south into Texas. Virtually, we don't have records of their intentions, right? But whether intentionally or just as a byproduct, push the Apache out of virtually their entire traditional range in Texas that they had been for at least a couple centuries. I mean, like, I don't want to say it was like intentionally trying to erase them, but by most like contemporary standards, it's like, yeah, it kind of seems like you know, an intentional erasing. I don't know what the terms of service are for that. So like, yes, like seems like an extermination campaign, right? Like that was carried out from, if you think of like the Texas Panhandle down to Austin, around there, some just short of the Balcones Escarpment. That's like a big territory, and they drove everybody who wasn't the Comanche pretty much more or less as the Lipan Apache and the Kiowa, who are smaller tribes. Who the Kiowa they built a great friendship with, and the Lipan Apache they would have it seems like a passing, sometimes friendship, sometimes tolerance. But the Apache were driven from northern and central Texas, and that's where we started to really first get these accounts, was from the Spanish missions where these Apache were flooding into other tribes too, like Karankawa, Tonkawa, Caddoan, I believe, Kichi, Waco, who were coming into these missions and saying like, listen, like whatever you got here, we're in for it. We're cool with it. Like just keep the Comanche away from us. Like this is what's going on out there is crazy, right? They'd point north and be like, what's going on out there is crazy. Just we'll stay here with you guys. Like you want us to like do whatever, you want us to convert, whatever. Just keep the Comanche away from us. Let us stay inside these walls. It's crazy out there. And they would start getting these accounts of just like black clad raiders who were just tearing through villages. And the level of violence is something maybe it's done a quick justice in Dances with Wolves to a degree, and in Apocalypto I think those do a pretty good what they're capable of showing. But the level of violence and degradation that was just de rigueur in a raid, I think was not unprecedented in the European mind, certainly, right? Like they've got this is the Spanish we're talking about in this instance. So it's like they've got centuries of warfare and conquest and being conquested in their own history, but it was a level of ferocity that I think even at the time was just astounding to everyone in the territory. And this expansion uh, that happened in the course of a couple centuries was, you know, not just consequential for the tribe, not just consequential for their neighbors. It was not even just consequential for the United States and their expansion westward. It was consequential, like I said, for the Spanish, the French, the English, the I mean, in like kind of a meta sense, the Russians, because it's like what happens in central in the center of America affects the peripheral. The Russians came to the western coast, so like, yeah, in like a kind of a meta sense. And be generous with me on that. So like, I'm just kind of like throwing it out there, right? But they had a massive ripple effect that affected trade markets in Europe because of the how many furs the Comanche would allow to be traded, or affected um, people's uh, where they were going to live, where political policies. Really, Texas itself was, or Texans, right, came from Anglo Americans being allowed by the Mexican government to come and settle what is today kind of northern, really, really central Texas, not northern and central. All my Texans out there, relax. Like I know where I'm talking about. I'm just, but central Texas, they were allowed to settle that because they were kind of intended to act as a buffer between the incessant Comanche raiding and certainly the northern settlements of Mexico, but most importantly Mexico City, because that's how that's how influential this became. Because uh, this tribe, who you think about it, like when Mexico City was still an Aztec empire, it was still at the height of the Aztec empire. um, the Comanche were still subsisting on grubs and roots in the Northern Rockies. And by the time the Spanish had taken over and made it into a Spanish city, and then the Mexicans take it over and made it into Mexico City, they were in fear of the people who had been, essentially impoverished, and perpetually impoverished only a century or two before. They were in such fear and believed themselves to be in such danger of Comanche raiding that they drastically changed their political policies, their geopolitical policies, in a way that resulted essentially in the creation, or in the Texas Revolution and the creation of Texas, and then their annexation into the United States. It had just wildly wide repercussions, and it also stopped westward expansion for centuries. Like there were no, um, if you look at Texas cities, like um, Dallas is formed fairly early. Austin in the 1830s is Waterloo, right? But in the 1840s, I believe. San Antonio very early in the 17th century, I believe. But then that's pretty much it. Like you don't see anything west of there that's very consequential for centuries, like till the well into the 1800s. And that is a direct result of the Comanche rise to power. And I think it's something that we really see the results of, especially living in Texas every day. And it's one of those things that I think is just fundamentally maybe underappreciated as far as what the Comanche did, the reverberations it's had in our own history, and really in kind of the current landscape, at least as far as Texans are concerned, certainly. But in the way that we understand um, the Amerindian culture, I think it's really important not to underestimate their what they accomplished in terms of like good and bad. So like not certainly like the raiding and the warfare that they were able to wage was incredibly violent and with very little precedent in the at least to that level. in the American experience, or in the North American experience, I should say. But they were also able to establish themselves as a political force, as an economic force. Their Shoshone dialect was the kind of lingua franca, if you will, for the Southern Plains and for the whole of Plains trading. Like if you wanted to trade, you spoke in their dialect. So at least the Shoshone dialect, and that's a direct result of the size, scope, and consequentialism of the Comanche Empire. And they rose from absolutely nothing. I've always thought it to be impressive in the literal sense that leaves quite the impression thing to do. So that's our kind of conclusion of our first live stream. I've got a husky who's getting a little antsy here, so if I've left anything out, don't worry. We're going to be doing this like frequently, so at least once a week. But I'll put a couple minutes on the clock here. I'll say, well, you know what I mean? Like we'll do a couple questions for a couple minutes. If anybody has any questions, well, thank you all so much for tuning in. We have like a little over 100 people a couple minutes ago, 96 people here. Thank you all so much for tuning in. Thank you for all your support. It is just a blessing to have you all watch. It's really, we have so much fun making the show, and really want to do a service to the people that we're talking about here. So hopefully we honor everybody's story here well. That's our intention. But if we have any, Husky's name is Junie. If we have any, I'll answer Comanche questions too, to the best of my ability. How far north into the Rockies were they? Just not quite into Canada, kind of northern Wyoming. Currently reading Empire of the Summer Moon. Yeah, it's a kind of must read for this. And then I would really go grab Pamela Hamilton's book. Like I said, the exact title escapes me at the moment, but if you type in Comanche to Audible or Amazon, these three books will come up, and they're all fantastic. Like I said, the three, let me like reiterate the three real quick. Empire of the Summer Moon by S.C. Gwynn. Comanches, The History of a People by T.R. Fehrenbach. And then the third one, which I've repeatedly failed to find on my Audible, but it's by Pamela Hamilton. So Pemma, Comanche. Google that. You'll find it for sure. Was Squanto the first? I don't think he was. Whose is the picture? Oh, that's Leon Russell, Master of Space and Time. Stranger in a Strange Land. Let's see. Average lifespan was very short, really, by 40. Like most men were kind of getting ready to wrap it up. It was just lack of resources, lack of food, and just a very hard, violent life. So if you lived past 40, you were doing really well. And if you had more than 2 kids, you were really exceeding expectations. Mama G, good to see you. Thanks for tuning in. Let's see. Championship Cowboys are short and strong, I believe. That's true. Championship Cowboys are short and strong. That's true. Bull Riders are not the biggest guys, but they got heart and they are strong. It seems like don't kick no, don't come for me. I'm making a joke, all right? Don't find me after the rodeo and come get me, all right? Like it's a joke. We've been entertained to see a hand-to-hand combat fight between the toughest Comanche versus the toughest cowboy. They do have, if you remember or maybe you don't remember, but there's a Spike TV show called Ultimate Warrior or something like that, where they would have 2 simulated warriors that they would kind of put video game stats against each other, carry out this combat that was like filmed in like, I don't know, like the foothills around Los Angeles or something. So it was like very obvious that it was not where they were saying they were, but they had the Comanche fought a Mongol warrior, and the Comanche won. I don't know. What do you guys think? I always have not. I guess I'm cool with that. I guess I would say that. I guess if I had to bet, I would bet Comanche. But I always thought like they made it a little too easy. It seemed like a little bit of a work in a way, right? Like, let's see here. Deadliest Warrior. That's right. Deadliest Warrior. Schroeder, you're a real one. Let's see here. I'm trying to. This is my first live chat too, so we're just making sure we get to. I'm trying to get to all of the questions here. One's final test. Let's see here. I don't think I missed any questions. Horses. All right. Hey, we love the Gen X, man. I'm a millennial. Gen Z, everybody. We want everybody in here. Get them all in here. Depending on the conditions they fought in, Mongol and Northern Europe would win. Yeah, right. In Northern Europe, but they're a steppe plains warrior tribe too. So like, they're not wholly dissimilar from American plains tribes. Shout out to the boomers. Shout out to the boomers. That's right. Greatest generation. We got them all in here. Gen Alpha. We'll get them in here. They're probably on that. Like, we'd have to be on some different platform for Gen Alpha. I don't know at this point. Gen Z. I say Gen Z. Yeah. Skibbity toilet Riz. Let's see here. If you pick up the dog and show us, you get bonus points. I don't know if she's a husky, so it's hard for me. Here, one sec. This is Junie. She's a husky pup, the history pup. Say hi. She's not very enthused. She's kind of had enough of the Comanche for today, or the Comanche history, I should say. I've been listening to a lot of it, so I don't blame her. Let's see. Speaking of guards, you can tell the audience about the Comanche's daily spiritual. Oh yeah, well the Comanche certainly liked tobacco, but they were ardent, especially when they got into the territory where it existed. Ardent users or ardent spiritual employers of peyote and mezcal. They Quanah Parker in particular, the last really kind of recognized, maybe popularly as the last great Comanche chief. Just I like Quanah Parker. I'm just saying sometimes that can be a controversial thing to say, but yeah, they were ardent users of what are low grade, medium grade psychedelics by today's, well, but definitionally but Quanah Parker was such a ardent practitioner that he, even when he adopted, white dress and lived in a house, like I think he even became baptized as a Christian. He insisted on still doing peyote, so it's like they party. Let's see. Let's see. Our land is called Kiowa, Comanche land. We all give each other. Kiowa, yeah, the Kiowa. What's up, man? Hey, thanks for tuning in. We'll be doing a live stream on the Kiowa too, because I think they're like more overlooked than the Comanche, and it's just like super cool. Like they have all of the same martial traits as the Comanche, and just like the coolest stuff. You guys look so like all the pictures like just look like, yeah, they have great headdresses, great shields, dress, and everything. Much more. It was much seemed like it's a much more involved part of the Kiowa culture than the Comanche, but they're such a symbiotic pairing on the plains. See, how much of the desire of Texans to be annexed do you think was a result of constant Comanche raiding? I don't. Maybe to be annexed into the Republic of Texas, but I think by the time they were annexed into or became a state, a lot of Texans were grumbling about how far away, how the capital being so far away. They weren't understanding kind of the severity of the problem, and how it was just a almost a completely different situation in many respects, than the more easterly, how would you phrase that, than the early Americans, as far as the 1776 on would have understood their dealings with tribes as a geopolitical entity. They were not able to do that with the Comanche, because of a lack of headman, because of a lack of real interest on the Comanches' part, and so that became a very hard concept for the federal government to grasp, and a lot of Texans, believe it or not, lost faith or became agitated with the federal government at that time. Comanche moon tonight. That's right. I was going to mention that. There's a Comanche moon tonight. Actually, that's like a good point. This was called, if you look outside tonight, a full moon was called a Comanche moon because they could pretty reliably predict, or they could rely on most of the raids coming during a full moon, mostly because of just illumination. Like it was the easiest time to do it. Comanche moon tonight. Excuse me. Let's see. Did the Comanche engage with any rituals with full moons like we have tonight? Not per se. They would until the 1800s, they adopted and adapted a lot of their spiritual practices. So they would take something from the Cheyenne, take something from the Arapaho, whatever looked cool, some from the Kiowa, right? They tried their sun dances later on. As things got worse, they would try, like all of us, right? Like things get harder, you try more and more things, and just they were just trying a sun dance, trying a war dance. But initially, no, it was more just kind of the pragmatism of the full moon. And if that happened to line up with like the guy's dream about an eagle, or that's just something I remember from the book, like a dream about an eagle, uh, as an example. If those two things coincided, the omen and the opportunity, then it was game on as far as the Comanche mindset was concerned. Such a ring to it. Let's see here. The Comanche reservation situation is, I'm not terribly I don't feel comfortable fully explaining it, but it's a little different than most I know it's different than other tribes. Couldn't really explain exactly how, but they are a recognized Comanche nation still, um, based in Oklahoma. I forget the exact location, um, but they're still like a recognized political entity within the country. Okay, what are we at here? We're almost at. We'll go a couple more minutes, and then I've gotta let the dog out, and we'll let everybody go on with their evening. But Lawton, Texas, again, that's another like political thing that I am not the one to explain, but Texas does not have reservations. Though their neighbors, Oklahoma, New Mexico. I Google it, right? Like I'm not a political analyst, I'm a historian. Let's see. Um, Crow and Blackfoot. Yeah, we will also be doing streams on the Crow and the Blackfoot, the Lakota. Basically, this is equal opportunity. I find all of these tribes, all of these stories, experiences, equally fascinating. So anything that we've done an episode on, we are likely going to do a live stream on at some point. We'll try and run surveys, and we'll try and make this a much more an interactive experience as we go. But yeah, if there's no more questions, then I want to thank everybody again for tuning in. If you have any, leave any more questions and comments in the comments, obviously. Please hit the like button. We've got 100 people watching right now. If you could all subscribe, if you're not already, that would be a huge, huge help to us. Only like 10% of our viewers are subscribers. So like if we can grow that, that would be a huge help. We will have 2 episodes out this week, as well as a couple shows, or a couple of shorts. And we're going to be kind of experimenting with live stream times. We might kind of try to see what works, especially with the upcoming football schedule. So not to go too much into how the sausage is made, but that's our plan going forward. Uh, Thank you all again for tuning in so much. Really appreciate all your support, and we'll be doing this again soon. Stay tuned this weekend or this week for our upcoming episodes. And thank you so much for tuning in to History at the OK Corral. home of history's greatest shootouts and showdowns. Now I have to find a way to gracefully exit this, but I don't know how yet. There we go. See you guys.